So we all know that red and blue make purple, right? Then why is it that some reds and blues make nice purples and others make really muddy ones? We're going to have a look at that today. Hello, I'm Rhonda and welcome back to my studio. Today we're going to have a look at color mixing. This is another aspect of color theory that I really enjoy, and I'm going to put a link down in the description to the color theory class that I'm currently taking, which I highly recommend. So most of you have seen a color wheel before. This is actually a pigment wheel. So what this does is it takes the color wheel and it puts the different paint pigments onto it. You can look them up online. There's a variety of different pigment wheels that you can find. There's some really extensive ones. This particular one here, which I'll link to in the description, is the pigment wheel for my actually for my heritage paints. I got this from their site. So this, instead of just listing, your basic colors, red, orange, yellow, that kind of thing, what this does is it actually puts the different pigments in their locations on the wheel. Now there can be some variety in the pigments. You'll find that some pigments are used in different quantities to make different colors and tones and that sort of thing. But in general, where they sit on the color wheel will tell you approximately where that pigment in the wheel will be located. So this is one of the important aspects of color theory that often gets overlooked if you haven't actually studied color theory. So we're going to go down to my table and I'm going to show you some of the different colors that I have, and we're going to mix them and compare them and see which ones make nice colors, which ones don't, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why that is. So first of all, I'm just going to tell you what colors I'm using. So right here I have Hansa yellow, yellow oxide, and Dariolide yellow. For my reds, I have quinacridone violet, I have naphthol red and naphthol red light. And for my blues here, I have phthalo blue, cerulean blue, and ultramarine blue. And I'll be using all of those colors to mix together and show you how different pigments mix. So first of all, I'm just going to explain to you how you can find your colors on a pigment wheel. So again, this is the one that I'll link to in the description below. It's for my heritage paints. You can look them up online. I found one that I'll link to as well that had pretty much all the pigments possible on it. But I'll use this one in particular because it shows these particular paints. So basically, once I know my paint color, I buy mine in these little jars here. I'll link to them in the description as well. So this jar of Hansa yellow here tells me that it's a PY74. So I look on the yellow area of my pigment wheel and I find here PY74. So I know that that's where this one is on the pigment wheel. The yellow oxide, this one is a PY42. It's down here a little further. My Dariolide yellow is kind of a yellow orange. It's going to be more in this area. It's not actually on this particular pigment wheel. And so each of these pigments, I can find them on this wheel and I know where they are. And the reason that's important is because, for example, if you look at the phthalo blue and ultramarine blue, okay? Here's the phthalo blue, there's the ultramarine blue. Now, the ultramarine blue leans towards a blue violet, whereas the phthalo blue leans towards a blue green. And that's going to really have an effect on how they mix with other colors on the wheel. We are going to get started. So we'll start with making some purples. So I made a little chart here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix each of these colors and put them out here, and then we'll talk about why they make the colors that they do. So the first one I had was my phthalo blue and my quinacridone violet. So we know that phthalo blue on the pigment wheel is a bit of a blue-green, and the quinacridone violet is PR122, so it's a red-violet. So when you mix a phthalo blue with a red-violet, you're going to end up with a color that sits somewhere in the middle of this line between the two of them. Because it's further into the inside of the color wheel, it will be muddier than if it was on the outer edge of the color wheel. So let's just test that out. So I'm going to take some of my Quin Violet, and I'll just take just a touch of my cup of water there, just a touch of the phthalo blue, because the phthalo blue is a very strong color. So we mix those together, and you're going to get this color of a violet. So that's the color of a violet you get when you mix phthalo blue with the quinacridone. Now, when I take that same quinacridone violet and I mix that with the cerulean blue right here, it makes a completely different color. Now, the cerulean blue is more, it's again a blue-green, but it's even more of a blue-green than the other one. So what you'll find is that since we are using a quinacridone violet here, it's a PR 122, it is actually a red violet, you will get some quite nice purples. And that's the one thing that I love about the violets. So you're not actually mixing a straight red here, you're mixing a violet in, which will actually make some quite lovely violets with these blues. Now we'll take the same violet and mix it with the ultramarine blue. And here you get it's another violet, and it's a much more, it's got a lot more intensity and vibrancy to it than the other two. And the reason for that is because those two on your wheel, here's your ultramarine blue and there's your quinacridone violet, they are closer on the wheel. And the closer they are on the wheel, the less tertiary they are. The more they go towards the center of the wheel, that makes them more tertiary. So because these two are out here, what you're getting is somewhere in between those two. When you mix with the phthalo blue, you're going further into the wheel. And when you mix with the cerulean blue, you're going even further into the wheel. So those colors lose their intensity. The colors on the outside of the wheel are more intense than the colors on the inside of the wheel. So that's why the purple, when you mix the ultramarine blue and the quinacridone violet, is more intense. Now we're going to do the same thing, but using the naphthol red. So our naphthol red on our color wheel sits right up it's just a slightly red violet. So it's sitting right in this zone. It's a PR 170. So it's sitting right in this area right here. So as you can see, if we look at what we learned from the last one, when it mixes with the ultramarine blue, it's going to be less tertiary than when it mixes with the phthalo blue and the cerulean blue. So we'll mix those up and see what happens. So we're going to take the naphthol red and mix it with just a touch of phthalo blue. And there you see, this is what I was talking about. You're going to get a much more muddy purple. That basically looks like a dark brown. And that is because when you're mixing those two colors, your line on your wheel is right here. So you're somewhere in this area here, which is a lot more tertiary than when you were mixing out in this area. That's why it's important to know what colors you have. When you're mixing, we're going to mix the cerulean blue with some of the naphthol red here. And again, you're going to get a quite muddy violet. And that is because, again, the cerulean blue is a blue-green. So you can see how much different these ones are, because that you're mixing a blue-green with a red-violet. So they're further apart on the color wheel. Then if we take that same naphthol red and we put the ultramarine blue into it, you're still getting a more tertiary violet, but it's not as brown as those other two. And that is because, again, here, when you look at your wheel, your ultramarine blue and your naphthol red are a lot closer together on the wheel. So that's your PB29 and your PR170 are a lot closer on the wheel than your phthalo blue over here and your cerulean blue over here. So your color is going to be a lot less tertiary. Now we're going to try the same thing again, but using a naphthol red light, which is a PR9. Now this is going to be an interesting one because your PR9 is actually a red orange. It's over in this area. So when you mix this PR9 with your ultramarine, you're going to be quite tertiary. Your phthalo, you're going to be very tertiary. And your phthalo blue, they're almost complements. And when you mix complements, they go very brown or gray. You can make your browns and grays by mixing your complements. So you're not going to get very nice violets, even though you are mixing a red and a blue. You're not going to get nice violets, not like you would if you were to mix your naphthol red with your ultramarine blue to get your violet, or your quinacridone with your ultramarine blue. This will give you a very, very tertiary color. So we're going to take the naphthol red light and we're going to mix it with some phthalo blue. And as you can see, immediately you're getting a very brown color. And when you mix it with the cerulean blue, again, you basically get mud. It's brown. And that is because you're mixing complements. When you mix complements, you get tertiary colors. Now when you mix that naphthol red light, or the PR9, with the ultramarine blue, you're going to still get a brown, but it does actually have a tinge of violet to it because you're not quite as tertiary as those other two. So what you can see from this is that although these are all blues and these are all versions of red, if you want to get really nice violets when you mix with your blue, you're going to want to use something like a red violet, like the quinacridone. That's a red violet and you're going to get these nice violets. If you want to get something that's a little bit more tertiary but still has a violet tinge to it, you're going to want to use your naphthol red or your PR170 with an ultramarine, because this is a blue violet, or yeah, this is a blue violet, and this is a slightly red violet. So those will give you a bit of a nicer violet, whereas these ones give you muddy colors. Your naphthol red light here, that will give you browns if you mix it with any of these blues, because they are opposite sides of the pigment wheel. So basically what you need to keep in mind when you're choosing your colors to mix, you can't just mix blue and red and get a nice purple. You have to choose colors that are closer together on the pigment wheel if you want them to make nice purples. So now we're going to basically do the same thing, but we're going to mix some greens. Now, some of you might be asking, okay, why is it important to know this? You know, I'm not going to mix my own colors. I'm going to buy ready-made colors. Well, one thing that it is important to know is how colors mix with each other. I'm just going to put out some more cerulean here. To know how colors mix with each other, because if you have say for example, you have some red sitting on your palette somewhere, and you start mixing up, you say you have some of this Naphthol red light, which is a PR9, sitting on your palette from some painting that you've done, and you start mixing up a nice purple, and you're using your quinacridone violet and your ultramarine blue, and you're getting a nice purple, and you dip it into that PR9, you're instantly going to be muddying that color, and you're losing your intensity of that color. So that's why, one of the reasons why it's important to know, even if you're using ready mixed colors. If you have some red sitting out on your palette, well, the complement of red is green. So let's say you're trying to paint with some nice green on your palette, and you get into that red, you're going to be muddying it. So this is why it's important to know. So now we're going to do the same thing with some yellows here. So we've got our phthalo blue, which is a blue green, and our Hansa yellow, which is PY74, which is a slightly to the yellow orange side. So we're going to see what kind of greens we can make using those yellows. So we've got one that's slightly to the yellow orange, one that's more to the yellow orange, and then I put in this PY42, which is yellow oxide, to show you the effects of going further into the color wheel. So again, number one, it loses its intensity as it goes further into the color wheel, and it becomes more of a tertiary color. So when we mix with the PY42, regardless of which blue we mix it with, it is going to make a more tertiary color, because the PY42 is a tertiary color. When you mix the Hansa yellow, which is pretty close to what you can get, the PY74 is pretty close to a pure yellow, other than it's a little to the yellow orange side. When you mix that with your blue greens, you're going to get some quite nice, fairly vibrant greens. When we mix it with the ultramarine blue, which is across the color wheel, we're going to be going more tertiary again. So we'll have a quick look at that. So I'm going to take my Hansa yellow here, and I'm going to mix in just a touch of the phthalo blue. Once again, phthalo blue is very strong, and you see how nice you get, this nice vibrant green. And what you'll find is, when we're mixing our greens, your phthalo blue and your cerulean blue, because they do lean to the green side, they're blue greens, they're going to make nicer greens than the ultramarine, which leans towards the violet side. So we'll take some cerulean blue and some Hansa. And again, you see you get a fairly nice green from that, because cerulean blue, although it is closer, it's actually closer to the yellow than even the phthalo is. So your cerulean blue is going to be quite a nice green as well. And this is one of the reasons why I rarely buy greens, other than I really do like that pine green I have, because you can make some really nice vibrant greens just by mixing yellows and blues. However, when you take the Hansa and you mix it with the ultramarine blue, you're going to get a much duller, more tertiary green. It still is a fairly nice green. If you want kind of more of it's a little bit more of an olive green, but it is definitely less vibrant and more tertiary. And so again, here you're mixing yellow and blue, but you're getting three different colors of green. The Hansa yellow and the ultramarine blue is a little bit more of a muddy or tertiary green. And by understanding your pigments and where they sit on the wheel, you'll be able to predict that and know when you're mixing what you're going to get. So let's do it with the yellow oxide. So these greens, if we are thinking about our color wheel again, these greens should be more tertiary than these ones, because these ones here are, the Hansa yellow is further out on the color wheel than the yellow oxide. So we'll take some yellow oxide here, and we'll mix it with some phthalo blue. And you can already see that that is going to give you a much less vibrant green. Again, it's not a bad green. It's an interesting green for if that's the color you're going for. But that's the important part, is to know what color you're going to get so that you know what to mix to get that color. If you are just flying by the seat of your pants and guessing, you won't know. So you might be trying for a color like this and you get a color like this and don't understand why. So hopefully this will help you to understand a little bit more why. So here we're going to take some of that again, and we're going to mix our cerulean with it. The cerulean blue is a much less, it's not as strong a blue as the phthalo, so you have to mix more blue to yellow ratio. But again, here we're getting a duller, more tertiary green. And that is because our yellow oxide PY42 is a more tertiary color. So you're going further and further into the wheel. Now when we mix that yellow oxide with the ultramarine blue, you're going to get a very muddy green. It's almost an army green. And the reason for that is because your ultramarine blue, PB29, is a blue violet. Your yellow oxide is a yellow, but it's a tertiary yellow. So if you draw a line between those two colors on the color wheel, you're getting into the very tertiary area. So you're going to end up with a very muddy color. The closer you are to the center of the color wheel, the more brown it's going to look. That's why all your things like your raw umbers, raw siennas, burnt umbers, those are all in the very center of your pigment wheel. So the closer you are to that center of the pigment wheel on your line here, the more it's going to be a brownish, muddy color. So now I have my Dariolide yellow, which is more of a yellow-orange. So it's a little bit further away on the color wheel from my blues. So we're probably going to get another more tertiary blue than you would with the Hansa yellow. So let's give that a try. Dariolide is one of my new favorite colors though. I just love it. Now when you mix it with that phthalo, because Dariolide is a quite intense color as well, you are going to get a fairly nice dark green. Again, anytime you mix the phthalo blue with a yellow to get green, or the cerulean blue with a yellow to get green, you're going to get some fairly nice greens because those are blue greens. So like I say, not all blues are created equal when it comes to mixing greens. So let's mix that with some cerulean. Now the cerulean blue, the other thing about it and why it sometimes makes these more tertiary looking greens that you'll see is because it's further towards the center of the wheel than your phthalo or your ultramarine. So again, we're moving towards the center of the wheel. So when you mix the phthalo blue or the cerulean blue PB35 with my yellow orange over here, you're getting closer into that center. And now we're going to mix it with the ultramarine blue. Mix it right up here. And there again, you're going to get a very tertiary green. Almost similar to when we mixed the yellow oxide, because that's a blue violet that you're mixing with your yellow. Blue violet and yellow orange are way further apart on the color wheel. So as you can see when you look at this, these colors down here, when you're mixing with the ultramarine blue and a yellow, you're going to get very tertiary colors because they're so far apart on the color wheel. Whereas Like your phthalo blue and your Hansa yellow make a beautiful vibrant green, and even your Dariolite and your phthalo blue make a beautiful vibrant green. But your ultramarine, not so much. So if you're going for more of an army green color, you would know, okay, I should be using my ultramarine blue. If you want a vibrant green, you should be using your phthalo blue. We're going to mix some oranges and just see what happens there. So again, we're going to be using our 3 reds and our 3 yellows. So we're going to start with the Hansa yellow, which is our PY74, and our quinacridone violet, which is our PR122. And as you can see, those are almost directly across the color wheel from each other, meaning they're almost perfect complements, which means that we should get something very brown when we mix those. When we mix the Hansa yellow with our naphthol red, which is over here, they're closer on the color wheel, so you're going to get something that's slightly less brown. And when you mix it with the PR9, which is a red orange, you should get a quite nice orange because you're a lot closer on the color wheel. So let's give that a try. So we'll start with our Hansa. And we're going to mix that with the quinacridone violet. And you can see that it is orange, but it's a much more of a brown orange. It's not a very vibrant orange, because those are across the color wheel from each other. Now we're going to mix the Hansa yellow again with the naphthol red. You see here we have a completely different orange. It's a little bit more vibrant and a little bit more orange because they're closer to each other on the color wheel, so they don't muddy each other. And when you mix that Hansa yellow with the PR9, it's kind of a, you got to try and judge how much of each to add depending on how some colors are stronger than others. So here you see we have a really nice vibrant orange. That's a beautiful orange, almost pumpkin orange. And that is because those two colors are closer on the color wheel. So you can really see it here. This is, the closer they are on the color wheel, the more vibrant they are. The further apart on the color wheel, the more muddy they are. It gets more brown. Now we're going to use the yellow oxide. So again, that's right here. So when we put that with the quinacridone violet again, we're going to be getting something fairly tertiary. When we put it with the naphthol red, it'll be less tertiary. And when we put it with the naphthol red light, it'll be less. But when you're mixing yellow oxide with these reds to make an orange, it's always going to be more tertiary than when you mix the Hansa, because the Hansa is a less tertiary color. The yellow oxide is already closer into the middle of the wheel. So let's go ahead and do that. Mix some yellow oxide and some quinacridone. As you can see, you get a very tertiary kind of ugly orange. That one is quite an ugly orange. I would not generally mix that for a color. Although, I mean, I suppose it could be something in some rocks or something like that at some point. But again, you're getting a much more tertiary color. When you mix the yellow oxide here with the naphthol red, again, you get something that's a little bit more orange. It's still tertiary, but it's a little bit more orange. But you can see when you compare it to this, when you're mixing the Hansa yellow, you're going to definitely get a much more vibrant, less tertiary color, because you lose intensity when you go into the center of the wheel, and yellow oxide is further into the center of the wheel. And we'll mix that yellow oxide then with our Naphthol red light. And you can see here, because of that yellow oxide being so tertiary, what was before a very vibrant orange is much less vibrant. It's a lot more muddy than what this was. It's not a bad orange. I kind of like that color, but it is a muddy orange. Now we're going to mix the Dariolide. Now the Dariolide is a yellow orange, so it sits kind of in this area. So when we mix it with the quinacridone and the Naphthol red and the Naphthol red light, we're probably going to get a nicer orange than what either of those other two did. But we'll see. So we'll mix the Dariolide with a little bit of quinacridone. And you can see we have a nicer orange. And that is because of the Dariolide, because the Dariolide is more of a red orange, or a yellow orange, sorry. So you look at these three here and you see this one is the most intense and the nicest orange, the least muddy, because PY83 and PR122 are closer on the color wheel than either of these pigments with the PR122. So now let's take our Dariolide and mix it with some Naphthol red. Red is a little bit stronger than the Dariolide. So here again we have a very nice vibrant orange, because those two are closer on the color wheel. And you'll notice this orange is more vibrant than this one, because PY83 is closer to PR170 on the color wheel than it is to PR122. And finally, when we mix our Dariolide yellow here with the PR9, which is a red orange, we're going to get a very nice vibrant orange. Almost like a neon orange. So you see how much more vibrant that is. You see how much more vibrant that is even than this one, because your Dariolide yellow is a yellow orange and your Hansa yellow is more of a straight yellow. So PY83 and PR9 are closer on the color wheel than PY74 and PR9. So that just basically is, it should show you how to read find your colors on the wheel, and what kind of mixes you get, and how you end up with more muddy colors, because the further apart on the wheel you are, the muddier your colors are going to be. The closer the colors are to each other, the less muddy. So I hope that helped you today, and let me know down in the comments if you prefer to mix your own colors, or if you like to use pre-mixed colors, and if you've ever studied color theory before. And be sure to check out the color theory class in the description. I highly recommend it. It's one that I'm currently taking, and it's where I'm learning a lot of this stuff. So I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you like and subscribe, and we will see you on the next video.